Welcome back to another Hoop Truth video. In this video, I'm going to be taking a time machine back to the absolute genesis of basketball dominance to break down an empire that will never, ever be replicated. I'm going to be deep diving into the greatest, most unbreakable dynasty in the history of sports, the Bill Russell 1960s Boston Celtics. Let's lay out raw, terrifying numbers right at the jump. 13 seasons and 11 NBA championships, 8 consecutive titles from 1959 to 1966. Bill Russell won more championship rings than he has fingers on his hands. In the history of North American professional sports, no organization has ever choked out the rest of the league the way Boston did in the 1950s and 1960s. But here's the problem. Modern basketball discourse has completely ruined how we look at this team. If you go on TikTok or you go on Twitter and you see people completely dismissing this dynasty, they say, oh, well, they played in the Plummer era. There are only 8 teams in the league. It was easy to win, whatever. They say Bill Russell couldn't even score in the modern NBA, whatever. Listen to me clearly. Everything you think you know about the era and the complexity of those championships is completely wrong. Because winning 11 titles in 13 years isn't a byproduct of a weak era. It is the result of a tactical, psychological, and institutional revolution that fundamentally created modern basketball. Now look at the modern NBA right now in 2026. Look at how hard it is for teams like the modern Boston Celtics or any modern powerhouse to even string together back-to-back titles without the salary cap, media fatigue, or locker room egos tearing them apart. The fact that the Celtics as an organization and Bill Russell maintained an absolute chokehold on professional basketball for over a decade is a statistical anomaly that defies human nature. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down everything. I'm looking at the advanced tactical innovations that the Celtics implemented decades before their time. I'm going to be breaking down the psychological warfare that Bill Russell used to break the spirits of the greatest athletes on earth. And I'm going to compare them directly to the Showtime Lakers, the Jordan Bulls, the Curry Warriors, and the G-Pop Spurs to prove why, dollar for dollar, this dynasty is the most unbeatable force to ever exist. So leave a like on this video right now. Make sure to hit subscribe for more daily NBA content because these videos do take a long time to produce. But other than that, let's get straight into the tape. To understand why this dynasty was completely unbeatable, then of course we got to start with the architect, Red Auerbach. People look at old film and assume 1960s basketball was just a bunch of guys running around flat-footed, tossing up random set shots. But in reality, Auerbach was a tactical genius who weaponized sports science and structural analytics decades before those terms even existed. Auerbach's first and most devastating innovation was the weaponization of the fast break. Before the mid-1950s, basketball was a very slow, methodical half-court game. Teams walked the ball up the floor, passed it 4 or 5 times before they even looked for a shot, and then when they did, they looked for a set shot. Auerbach realized that the most efficient and effective way to score was to attack the defense before they could even set up, but you can't really run a fast break without a reliable trigger. That's where legends like Bob Cousy and Bill Russell step in. The moment Bill Russell pulled down a defensive rebound, the clock started. Russell didn't just hold the ball or look for a guard to walk up to him. He mastered the outlet pass. Before his feet even hit the hardwood, Russell was turning in midair and firing a chest pass to Bob Cousy at half court. Cousy was the premier spatial processor of his era. He would spearhead a 3-on-2 or a 2-on-1 break, which would always result in an easy layup for Sam Jones or Frank Ramsey. Now, Boston deliberately pushed the pace to a level that physically broke their opponents. They averaged over 115 possessions per game. In any era without modern charter flights, luxury hotels, or advanced physical therapy, Boston's conditioning was a weapon. They literally ran teams into the ground. But it wasn't just about the pace, it was about roster optimization and role clarity. Long before the concept of 3-and-D or role players was popularized, Auerbach built a modern ecosystem. He didn't want 5 guys who all needed 20 shots a game. He drafted and traded for hyper-specific skill sets. He had Sam Jones, one of the most clutch elite bank shot mid-range assassins in the league history. He had Casey Jones, a lockdown perimeter defender who didn't care about scoring a single point, but he would make the opposing guard's life an absolute living hell for 48 minutes. He had Sat Sanders, a physical, switchable forward built to deny entry passes, and most importantly, Auerbach invented the sixth-man concept with Frank Ramsey, and he later perfected it with John Havlicek. Auerbach realized that starting your 5 best players was an amateur mistake. By bringing an all-star caliber wing like Havlicek off the bench, Boston maintained an elite physical intensity when the opposing team starters began to tire. They possessed a structural depth that no other team in the league could match. While opponents like the Lakers or the Warriors relied heavily on 2 superstars playing 48 minutes, Boston could throw 8 or 9 future Hall of Famers at you in waves. They were tactically deeper, physically fitter, and structurally more advanced than the rest of the world. And at the absolute center of this ecosystem sat the ultimate defensive cheat code. Of course, now we have to talk about the anchor, the captain, the greatest defensive player to ever draw breath on this earth. We're talking about Bill Russell. This is where we need to destroy the modern online narratives once and for all. People look at Russell's career shooting percentages, which is only 44% from the field, which is not great from a center, and his career scoring average of only 15.1 points per game, and they say he's overrated offensively and he couldn't play today. But what they fail to realize is that Bill Russell didn't need to score, because Bill Russell single-handedly dictated the offensive efficiency of both teams on the floor. So he didn't play defense, but he was a defensive system. Before Bill Russell arrived in the NBA in 1956, defense was played entirely on the ground. Big men stood flat-footed, stayed between their man and the basket, and they just put a hand up. Russell was an Olympic-level high jumper with a 7'4" wingspan and elite lateral quickness. He took the game into the air. He invented vertical rim protection. He finished his career with 21,620 rebounds, which is 22.5 rebounds per game, and an estimated 8.1 blocks per game. The NBA did not officially track block shots during Bill Russell's career, but historians, coaches, and film analysts who have broken down surviving game tapes have concluded that Russell routinely averaged between 8 to 10 blocks per game in the playoffs. Just let that sink in. He was erasing nearly 10 possessions a night. But it's how he blocked the shots that made him a genius. Russell used to say the idea is not to block every shot. The idea is to make your opponent think you're going to block every shot, which is just tactical genius right there. If a player drove down the lane, Russell wouldn't just swat the ball into the third row to look cool for the cameras. He would softly tip the ball out of the air directly into the path of Bob Cousy or Casey Jones to spark that devastating fast break urged by Coach Auerbach. He turned a defensive block into an immediate offensive asset. Because Russell could guard the entire paint by himself, it allowed the Celtics' perimeter defenders, which were Casey Jones and John Havlicek, to play a style of hyper-aggressive, full-court pressing defense that no other team could replicate. They could gamble, press, and deny passing lanes because they knew that if they got beat, the greatest safety net in sports history was waiting at the rim. If you look at the advanced metrics, throughout Russell's 13-year career, the Boston Celtics had the #1 defensive rating in the NBA for every single consecutive season except one. They are routinely 5 to 6 points per 100 possessions, better than the second best defensive team in the league. That is the modern equivalent of a team holding opponents to 95 points a game while everyone else is giving up 115. That is ridiculous. And then there is the rebounding, which is 22.5 points per game for his career. In the playoffs, that number climbed to 24.9. He and Wilt Chamberlain locked up the boards in a way that will never happen again. Russell understood the physics of the ball coming off the rim. He memorized the shooting tendencies of every player in the league. He didn't just rely on his athleticism, he outthought you. His IQ was absolutely insane. He was an absolute basketball savant who treated the defensive end of the floor like a genius. He took away your primary option, he destroyed your confidence, and he choked out your offense until your team completely collapsed. He was an absolute alien on the defensive end, and he might be the greatest defensive player of all time, and he was the leader of the greatest defensive dynasty, the greatest dynasty overall. because of their incredible elite defense. All right, now I got to address the elephant in the room. Looking directly at the most common criticism this dynasty faces from modern casual NBA fans, which is the weak era narrative. People say they only played against 8 teams. They played in a plumber era. It's easy to win a championship when you only have to win 2 playoff series. But let's apply some real logic and historical context here. When you have an 8-team or 9-team league, what happens to the talent? It is hyper-concentrated. In the modern NBA in 2026, the talent pool is spread out across 30 different franchises. If you are an elite superstar, you might only play against another elite superstar 3 or 4 times a year in the regular season. But in 1961, all the greatest players on earth were packed into just 8 locker rooms. That means Bill Russell had to go head-to-head against Wilt Chamberlain, the most physically terrifying statistical monster in human history, 10 to 12 times every single regular season. He had to play against Elgin Baylor and Jerry West constantly. Every single night was an absolute dogfight against a Hall of Fame center because there were no expansion teams. There's no bottom-tier tanking teams where you could just rest your starters and coast to an easy victory. Also, because there are fewer teams, the familiarity breeds absolute contempt. You played the same rival team in the playoffs year after year. They knew your plays, you knew their plays, they knew your tendencies, and they knew your weaknesses. To beat the exact same elite opponents in a 7-game series year after year requires a level of psychological resilience that modern teams never have to experience. And let's talk about the physical reality of that era. Modern players have sports science, custom orthotics, cryotherapy, chartered private jets where they can sleep in flatbed seats, and millions of dollars dedicated to recovery. The 1960s Celtics literally flew commercial. They often woke up at 4 a.m. to catch a connecting flight, slept on benches in train stations, and played back-to-back games in unheated, drafty arenas with literal ice beneath the hardwood floor. They wore heavy canvas sneakers with zero arch support. To maintain an elite championship-level output for 13 years under those brutal physical conditions is infinitely harder than doing it in the modern era of ultimate luxury. But the ultimate proof of this dynasty's greatness is who they beat. Bill Russell went 7-1 in playoff series against Wilt Chamberlain. He went 7-0 in the NBA Finals against Jerry West and Elgin Baylor's Los Angeles Lakers. He didn't beat a bunch of unathletic players. He consistently broke the hearts of top 10 all-time legends of the sport. He took the absolute best shot that the golden generation of basketball could throw at him, and he stood victorious every single time. The weak era argument isn't just lazy, it's historically illiterate. Now, I'm not saying that this dynasty could compete against a dynasty from this era or any other era, but I am saying that this dynasty has the largest gap from any other dynasty comparatively to other teams in that era. To truly solidify the legacy of the Bill Russell Celtics, we have to stack them up directly against the other legendary empires in NBA history. So let's do a definitive dynasty showdown. And we're going to start with the 1980s Showtime Lakers, which is ultimately the next dynasty in the NBA. Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar won 5 championships in a decade, an unbelievable run, but the Showtime Lakers never won more than 2 titles in a row. Egos clashed, injuries happened, and they routinely fell to the Celtics or the Pistons. Now, we're going to look at the 2010s Golden State Warriors, where they had Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and they even added Kevin Durant, and they revolutionized the game with space and pace, and they won 4 titles. But at their absolute peak, human fatigue and locker room friction tore them apart. Kevin Durant left, legs got tired, and the dynasty effectively capped out. Now let's look at the gold standard for most modern fans, the 1990s Chicago Bulls. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and the greatest coach of all time, and Phil Jackson. 2 separate three-peats, 6 championships in 8 years, unbelievable, flawless execution when they got to the finals, and I do think this is the second best dynasty ever. But why are the Bill Russell Celtics still superior? It's because Michael Jordan got so physically and mentally exhausted by the sheer burden of maintaining a dynasty that he had to literally retire from the sport twice just to clear his head. The Bulls dynasty lasted for 2 blocks of 3 years because human nature dictates that you cannot maintain that level of intense pressure without burning out. Bill Russell didn't burn out. and Red Auerbach did not burn out. Just think about how insane an 8P is. To win 8 consecutive championships, that means that for nearly a decade, you never had a bad shooting night in an elimination game. You never had a devastating injury to a key player that ruined your season. You never let complacency creep into your locker room. You never got tired of hearing your coach's voice. Every single year, the entire NBA universe woke up with one single goal: to destroy the Boston Celtics. And every single year, Bill Russell and Red Auerbach looked them dead in the eye and said, "Come and take it." They survived roster turnover. Bob Cousy retired in 1963 and they kept winning. Bill Sharman left and they kept winning. Red Auerbach retired from coaching in 1966 and Bill Russell became a player coach, and he won them 2 more titles while coaching the team and playing 45 minutes a night against players with the talent of Wilt Chamberlain. That is why this dynasty is completely unassailable. They didn't just have a high peak, they possessed a competitive longevity that defies sports science and human psychology. They didn't just run the league, they owned it for an entire generation. There's a kid that was born in the 1950s that started watching basketball at around 10 years old, and he doesn't know, he lived 10 years of his life without knowing what it looked like with the Celtics not in the finals. That is absolutely insane just to think about. And this is by far the greatest dynasty of all time. And like I said earlier, I don't think this is the greatest one team of all time. I don't think this is they could compete with teams from now or compared to now. But I do think dollar for dollar, this is the greatest dynasty of all time. But other than that, that's going to wrap up this video. So there you have it. The real unvarnished truth about the Bill Russell Boston Celtics. They weren't lucky. They didn't play in a weak era. They were just a hyper-advanced, defensively terrifying, psychologically unbreakable machine that set a standard of winning that will never, ever be touched as long as human beings play the game of basketball. When you look at the landscape of the sport today, in 2026, where player movement, super teams, and media noise make continuity almost impossible, what the Russell Celtics did looks more impressive with every single passing year. They are the alpha and the omega of basketball dynasties. But I do want to hear from you guys. Am I giving too much credit to the old school, or do you see the absolute vision? Does the 8P solidify them as the undisputed #1 dynasty ever, or are you still taking Jordan's Bulls or Steph's Warriors? Drop your thoughts, your personal dynasty rankings, and your arguments in the comments below, and let's have some debates going. Please do me a massive favor because, as you know, these videos take a very long time to produce, so make sure to like and subscribe for more daily NBA content.